afternoon. My name is Steve Hernandez, and I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut State Legislature's Nonpartisan Commission on Women, Children, Seniors, Equity, and Opportunity. We are here today for a public forum called There Is No Place Like Home, an equal access forum. Today we are hosting, together with the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness, and also our friends from the Connecticut State Legislature, who will be introducing themselves later on in the program. Our focus today will be on HUD's proposed changes to the Equal Access Rule, which undermines protections for transgender and gender nonconforming people served by HUD's programs. The proposed changes remove provisions to the Equal Access Rule that ensure that transgender non-binary people have equal access to shelter accommodations based on their gender identity and do not face invasive and discriminatory questions or requirements when entering a program. This is a critical conversation today, and I share the sense of urgency of everyone on this panel. And without further ado, I would love to now turn to our agenda. Firstly, we will be hearing from State Senator Saud Anwar. Welcome, State Senator.
Thank you so much, Steve. And I wanted to thank the Commission for Women's, Children's, Seniors, and Equity and Opportunity. And I also wanted to thank the Coalition Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness, and my friends, State Representative Jeff Curry, for his leadership, and Representative Ragib Ali Brennan for his leadership in this effort. And I know the LGBTQ plus Health and Human Services Network is instrumental at this time. And I think this is why this was needed, because we are having a conversation. I sometimes look at the calendar, and I sometimes look at outside to see which planet am I living in, which world, which time era are we living in, because it's why are we having conversations like this? And unfortunately, we are living in a time where people are being judged based on the protected classes. People are being judged based on their personal choices. Their rights to live a safe, secure life is being impacted. And I think because of the federal laws that are going to threaten our community members, we have to stand up and very clearly state that this is not who we are. These are not the values that we live by. And we will make sure that we'll protect each and every individual in our community. And we will stand united to make sure that the federal laws do not impact our community members. And I'm so glad that so many of our activist community members, and of course, our Commissioner for Department of Housing is over here. I am a partner and an ally, and I look forward to making sure our community members are protected. And I want each and everyone who's listening and the ones who are in our panel to know that they're not alone. We are with you completely and all the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator. You know, the one thing that is so striking to me is that the state of Connecticut is a safe space, and it's a safe space for our community. And it's embodied by what you just said, and also by the panel that we see before us today. So I really just want to take a moment again to thank you and your leadership and everyone that's here. We're going to move next to Sarah Fox from the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. Sarah, your sense of urgency and the coalition's sense of urgency in addressing this issue was so compelling to us, and I really want to welcome you.
Thank you, Stephen. And I really appreciate the Commission helping to focus on this important issue, and also the LGBT plus Health and Human Services Network. As a proud gay woman, you know, every day when we walk outside in Connecticut, you know, there are times when I don't feel safe holding my wife's hand, and I can only think about and imagine what it feels like to not feel like there's any safe place for you to go. And this rollback from the federal government, I think, sends a very bad message to all people across Connecticut and impacts the way that people may see their access to shelter and safety. And that's why we're so urgent and why we brought this here today. We want to encourage everyone to sort of spread the word that our shelters are a safe place, that they are a place of refuge, and to continue the work that we started in 2016. And you'll hear from Diana Lombardi, the executive director of the Trans Advocacy Coalition, later. But Diana had brought forward that there were really a lot of impediments that were keeping people out of shelter and that we're causing people not to feel safe. And we did a ton of work together with ACT Connecticut, with the Center for Fair Housing, to focus on really ensuring safe access to shelter and fair housing for individuals who are transgender and non-binary, and to make it so that our programs had gender inclusive language and our policies as well. And this rollback really strikes a chord. And I think we have to work together to just send a clear message that in Connecticut, although I would hope across the nation, we are gender inclusive, and that people can access shelter in whatever way that they identify, and that is something that we will continue to uphold.
Thank you, Sarah. You know, this really is a state and national partnership. The advocates on the ground here in the state who are ensuring that there is safe shelter for our people, but also on a national level. And with that, I want to introduce you, Dylan. Welcome from True Colors United. We're so happy that you're here with us today.
Thank you so much. Can I get a thumbs up if folks can hear me all right? Okay, great. I'll flag really quickly before I start speaking. I am on family vacation. We are on our way out of town right now, and so there's a lot of motion in the car. I just appreciate y'all having some grace for that. Thank you, Sarah, for inviting me to be here today. I'll give an overview of where we are. In 2016, of course, the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development adopted the Equal Access Rule to start to work toward transgender people being able to access emergency shelter in alignment with their gender identity, which really is a public safety issue for trans people to be at lesser risk of violence when accessing these services, and at lesser risk of violence and the higher rates, frankly, of death that we see among people who are unsheltered versus sheltered when experiencing homelessness. As we worked through the first 4 years of this rule being in place, we started to really see some compliance with the rule. I think across the country, we still aren't there, right? This rule is still in place right now, and we still don't have full compliance from every continuum of care, which is a real problem, and I think is one of the bigger problems as we go into this moment where this rule is potentially going to be coming off of the books. I get asked all the time, do you really think that people are just going to stop providing safe access to shelter to trans people if they've been doing it all of this time? And the answer is no. I'm not worried about anyone who's doing it right now. I think that anyone who's been providing equal access to shelter for these past 4 years will have found that transgender people are really quite easy to accommodate once you get through sort of the process of understanding and adopting not coming to compliance in different parts of the country. And frankly, not just about those providers, but also about the message that this is sending to trans people across the country. So I think that hearing this strong state leadership in Connecticut is going to be so critical for protecting trans people from violence and discrimination and from the harsher experiences that people have with unsheltered homelessness. Folks need to be hearing that strong message so that they don't avoid services, so that they come in, so that they get services, they access shelter, and that they use that shelter hopefully as that access point to long-term safe and affordable housing services. So, that's really what all of this is about to us, is about making sure that discrimination cannot happen, that fear of discrimination does not have to happen, and that this rule stays in place so that hopefully under a next administration, we can continue to build on this progress and really get to a place where we're seeing the transgender people experiencing homelessness across the country have their needs met in every community, which has not been the case so far. Thank you so much, Stephen. I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Dylan. And I often think about the fact that when you look at the landscape of homelessness, specifically among young people, there are so many LGBTQ plus members of our community that are homeless for all the reasons that we can imagine, and then for reasons that we can't. So it's so critical that we continue to be diligent about the dignity of shelter and ensuring that every one of us has access to that. So thank you for your work on the national level, Dylan, and thank you for joining us on your vacation. I'd like to move next to Erin Kempel for more of a local appeal. Erin, I have so much respect for the work of the Connecticut Fair Housing Center. Housing and shelter are two things that are very near and dear to my heart, and the work that you do is at the very center of that. So welcome, Erin.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate being here to speak to people about this very important issue. As Sarah mentioned and Dylan also referred, we've been working on this issue with all of you for a while to make sure that people in Connecticut know that they can get shelter and that they will be safe regardless of their gender identity or sexual orientation. I'm going to share my screen right now because I really want people to understand exactly what the law says here in Connecticut. So this will just take a minute. Here we go. So that should be up on your screen right now. Let me know if anyone does not have it. And I will do my best to push more buttons or something. So what you're looking at right now is just an introduction to the Connecticut Fair Housing Center and a little bit about us. I have given this to CCEH and to the organizers of this, so you'll be able to see it once I'm done, and if you have any questions about exactly what I've said. So in order to make sure that you understand how the law works, there are two different laws that govern fair housing. One is federal law, and under the federal law, it's illegal to discriminate based on race, color, national origin, sex, or gender, disability, religion, and familial status. But what we're really here to talk about today are the state protected classes, the ones that were passed by the Connecticut legislature. So in addition to all of the federally protected classes, Connecticut also protects people based upon ancestry, marital status, age, sexual orientation, lawful source of income, gender identity, and gender expression, as well as veteran status. Obviously, today we're here to talk about sexual orientation and lawful source of income, and gender identity and expression. So Connecticut law says that it is that people who have a preference for heterosexuality, homosexuality, or bisexuality are protected under the sexual orientation law. People who have a history of such a preference, people identified with such a preference. And while I do not think that people who have a sexual orientation that includes being homosexual or bisexual, when the law was passed, the legislature felt it important to include a disclaimer that sexual orientation protections do not include people whose sexual preference includes children. Gender identity or expression was added to the law in 2017, I believe. I could be wrong about the exact date. But the main definition is that it's for gender identity or expression is a person's gender-related identity, appearance, or behavior, whether or not that gender-related identity, appearance, or behavior is different from that traditionally associated with the person's physiology or the gender that was assigned at birth. I think the more important part of this definition is this second one here, because this is one of the things that makes Connecticut unique. Gender-related identity can be shown by providing evidence included but not limited to medical history, care, or treatment of gender-related identity issues, consistent and uniform assertion of the gender-related identity, or any other evidence that gender-related identity is sincerely held part of a person's core identity. So someone does not need an official piece of identification from the government that shows their current gender identity. It can be something like a letter from a doctor or something showing that they have been enrolled in school or have otherwise used the that gender identity. So what does this actually mean? As we all know, there has been a proposed change to the federal regulation. However, what the new rule actually says is that shelters are allowed to set their own preferences with regard to sexual orientation or gender identity. It doesn't mandate a change in preferences, and it doesn't prohibit shelters from allowing people in who have a gender identity that is non-conforming, or if there's sexual orientation that is objectionable to someone who's at the shelter. But it's most important to remember that when in Connecticut, no one can discriminate because someone's sexual orientation or their gender identity or expression. So regardless of what the federal law says, we here in Connecticut can assure people that regardless of their sexual orientation or their gender identity or expression, they will be safe at shelters because people cannot discriminate against them and they cannot treat them differently. And this applies even if the shelter is receiving federal funding and is only receiving federal funding and no funding from any other source. So in order to comply with the law, you cannot treat people differently because of their sexual orientation. That means you cannot refuse to allow them to access shelter. You can't refuse them to. You can't refuse to allow them to access shelter with the sex that or the gender that they are attracted to. You can't refuse to allow them to use the amenities of the shelter, such as bathrooms, changing rooms, community rooms, and you cannot mandate that the person have an AIDS or STD test before admission. With regards to gender identity or expression, you have to allow people to choose the gender shelter that with which they comply, regardless of what it says on their official identification. You can't treat people differently by having different terms and conditions. A couple of years ago, we know that there was a shelter that was very proud of the fact that they made people who were trans stay in a closet and not in the general population. And the reason they were proud is because they thought that was really a good thing for people in terms of safety. You can't ask intrusive questions. As you know, we did fair housing testing on shelters throughout Connecticut a few years ago. And some of the responses that people who were trans received were questions like, have you had top surgery yet? How about bottom surgery? Which bathroom do you use? Those kinds of questions are not allowed with regards to people who are transgender. That really finishes what I wanted to say here today. But again, I want to assure people who are in the shelter system or using the shelter system that there is nothing that should make people in Connecticut feel that they are in any way in danger or otherwise feeling as if they are not safe to go to shelter. Thank you.
Erin, thank you for that presentation. You know, there were parts of your presentation where I'm so comforted that we are in the state of Connecticut and that we're having this discussion, because I think one of the biggest things, one of the first effects of what things have when things change nationally is fear and fear of the unknown. And I think that public information is critical. I'm also reminded, of course, of how far we've come, but how far we have to go. Just with some of the nuances in our laws, which are so arcane and really speak to a different time, almost the dark ages. So thank you so much, Erin, for that. And before we move on to the next part of our presentation, our panel, I'd like to thank CTN for covering us today live, and also our friends on Facebook Live for joining us. You can comment in our Facebook Live section, and of course, this episode will be rebroadcast as well. So now we're going to move on to our There's No Place Like Home panel. I'd like to welcome each of you. I'm going to have each of you introduce yourselves, because through the magic of Zoom, when you speak, you come forward in the screen and we're able to see you. So I'm going to start with Seila Mosquera Bruno. What I'd like to do, I think, is have each of you join the conversation and give your own introduction, say who you are and your perspective and why this matters to you. So the first, I'd like to welcome Seila Mosquera Bruno, State Department of Housing Commissioner. Welcome, Commissioner.
Thank you, Stephen. And thank you, Erin, for the education. As Senator Ungar mentioned, it looks like we are going backwards instead of moving forward. With this, trying to eliminate this rule with the equal access, it's just, is one more thing on this administration that it means that we have a lot of work to do, a lot of work to make sure that people are educated. In Connecticut, we're lucky, very lucky to have these rules and these protections. And there is no place like home, being in Connecticut. The homeless service system in Connecticut practices self-ensuring those who are most vulnerable have access to resources. Connecticut's 2019 point-in-time count data illustrate vulnerability of the LGBTQ youth population. The LGBTQ respondents show a higher rate of homeless and housing instability than their heterosexual counterparts. Nationally, LGBTQ youth were found to have 120% increased risk for homeless and housing instability. So for me, looking at those data, 120% more. So that means we have a lot of work to do still. So I'm the commissioner for the Department of Housing, and we have under our mandate to provide support to the shelters. So what I will say is that to our LGBTQ community, that the homeless service systems services to create an environment where you feel safe. We're trying to protect you. You are gonna be safe. You are and will continue to be welcoming in emergency shelters, directly funded by the state of Connecticut, or as Erin said, even if they are federally funded. So the protections are going to be there, and we are going to make sure that you are safe. And we will take action if any of the shelters is having or is conducting any discrimination against any of our residents. I mean, discrimination shouldn't happen to anyone. Nevertheless, to this fragile group that we need to protect.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, and thank you for your leadership. Leadership is so critical, not only in the space of understanding the full landscape, but also understanding where the quiet corners of discrimination may happen, and having a leader that's aware and can actually cares is so very critical. So thank you for your leadership in this space, Commissioner. Next, I'd like to introduce Richard Cho. Hi, Richard. Let us know who you are.
Great, thank you so much, Stephen. I'm Richard Cho. I'm the CEO of the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. First of all, Stephen, and I want to thank you and the Commission on Women, Children, Seniors, Equity and Opportunity for co-hosting this event, and also our state legislators who are here and all of the partners who have joined with us today. I guess I'm speaking from certainly my current role leading the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness, which is the membership association that represents homeless services providers and shelter providers in our state. We have several members with us here today, but also as someone who worked in the Obama administration at the time when we passed the Equal Access rule. And as the saying goes, I was one of the people who was in the room when it happened, and I can't take credit for actually having drafted the rule. But I remember the conversations at the time were really about not only, they were certainly motivated by a recognition about the dangers that people who are transgender or gender nonconforming experience when they are homeless, greater rates of abuse, violence, trafficking, all the things that Dylan actually spoke to earlier. And the conversation wasn't, well, how do we actually just put in the minimum place protections? It was about, how do we go as far as possible in ensuring that people have full protections to access life-saving shelter so they can avoid abuse and trafficking and victimization. And the conversation was not only how can we make a rule that applies only to HUD-funded shelters, but frankly to every shelter and homeless service program and housing program that is available in the entire community. And to think about the fact that here we are now, 4 years or so later, and the administration's proposing to reverse back a policy that took many years to actually get right and to push forward, and was seen as not the end of the process, but the beginning of the process to make shelters more welcoming for people who are transgender and gender nonconforming. And really, the fact that they're proposing this rollback is nothing but cruel. I think it's nothing but red meat thrown to a base that is driven by bigotry. There's no policy reason for this rollback of this rule. There's no rationale. It does not help us end homelessness. All it does actually is to signal cruelty. Not to mention the policy, the rollback, and the way that they've proposed this rollback is unworkable. It makes no sense to have a policy in which you can discriminate against people, but then you expect other shelters to be able to accommodate folks, or that you have to allow people who are supposedly feel uncomfortable with having somebody who's transgender or gender nonconforming be able to go to a different shelter. None of those policies make any sense, and really all it does is it signals this idea that we can legitimize a kind of a Jim Crow for people who are transgender or gender nonconforming. And then lastly, I think really what it's all intended to do is to sow disruption and division. As Aaron mentioned, we are fortunate enough in our state to have laws that protect people who are LGBTQ from discrimination along with other protected classes. And that's fantastic. But at the same time, we have a lot more to do beyond just having laws that protect people to create a welcoming environment that not just says, if you are transgender or gender nonconforming, you can come to shelter. We want a system where it says, we want you to come to shelter. We want you to come in from the dangers that you might experience outside or sleeping on the streets. And so, I think we can all feel a bit complacent in Connecticut to say we have the kind of laws that protect people who are transgender or gender nonconforming in our state. But I think we should fight against that complacency, because it takes more than just laws and protections. It takes us to actually have a culture that is welcoming. And we know we had a lot more work to do, not just to have our shelters be compliant with the equal access rule, but frankly, to fully embrace having shelters that are welcoming to people of all genders and orientations. And so I really want to put out a call to action and just urge everyone to join us in this fight to say that even though our state may have the luxury to have laws that protect our transgender people, we need to go further than that and to fight this law to make a strong message that such rules don't make any sense, they're cruel, and that we want to be a state that allows shelter to be accessed by anyone, and that we're going to go even further to make those welcoming spaces. So again, thank you for co-hosting this, for all of you for joining this, and please join us in this fight and voice your opposition to the rollback of the equal access rule.
Richard, for that, I love your distinction between you are allowed and you are welcome. And that's a critical distinction, because it really could make a difference in whether or not someone feels really that they have a place and they can go. And, when I think about places where you can go, and I think about the work on the ground, I think of Jennifer Paradis. Welcome, and please introduce yourself and let us know what you're doing.
Hi, everybody. It's both a wonderful thing and a scary thing to come after the commissioner and Richard Cho, but it's wonderful to be here with you, all of you, to see so many wonderful advocates and folks on the ground, and thank you everybody for joining in this important conversation. My name is Jennifer Paradis. I'm the executive director of the Bethel Center in Milford. We provide emergency shelter services and food programs to individuals, families, veterans, youth. And this is a very personal subject matter to me as somebody who identifies with the LGBT community, as a gay woman, and as somebody who experienced homelessness as a high school student and a college student. Thankfully, I did not have to access shelter at the time of my homeless experience in my journey, but that was certainly in question, and this was a conversation that I remember having talking with myself and my closest friends at the time, worried about what acceptance looked like in those spaces, and just feeling like the hurdles were too big to climb. So as a shelter provider, I mean, I think what the Equal Access Rule really did for us was provide very clear, needed guidance. And I agree with Richard wholeheartedly when it comes to kind of this state of what feels like safety and compliance, complacency in the state of Connecticut. Really, we do have a very open and affirming community in our state, but as you said, Stephen, discrimination hides in the quietest corners, and sometimes rather unintentionally. And so I think that shelters really needed and accepted the guidance as to how to support trans people and non-binary and gender non-conforming people in our spaces, ensuring equitable access, equitable, fair, safe, healthy access to emergency shelter services for anybody coming to our door in need of those services. And as a provider, I think what's really most important to know and to understand is just how narrow that door is to access, to engaging a young person or engaging somebody who's chronically homeless. Providing them basic emergency shelter services is just the beginning of it. You have to develop trust. You have to develop a long-standing, strong relationship with them. And all of that begins with having the guidance and the support of our federal and state government behind us. And so, I see the fragility when it comes to removing the Equal Access Rule as a federal law. And can certainly see how it will gradually trickle its way down even to the most progressive states like Connecticut. In a very personal way, I think that we owe it to our brothers and sisters and friends and family to make sure that that human dignity is at the forefront of this conversation. Nobody is accessing emergency shelter services because they want to. Everybody deserves access to emergency shelter services because that is what they need. And that is what they need for themselves, for their families, for their health and well-being. And so I think the most important piece that we have to remember here is that that it is not necessarily the words on a piece of paper that we're looking at. We really are we are tasked with the enormous responsibility to change people's trajectory, to support the change that they want to see within themselves, and to provide equitable access, equitable, fair, safe, healthy access to basic human rights services like housing. And so I guess I'll leave it there for now, but so happy to be joining this conversation with everyone.
Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you for reminding us that, some of those quiet spaces of discrimination are unintentional. But in order to discrimination, we have to be intentional about the work and dive in head first and root out those spaces wherever they may be. And when you think of the intentional work, I'm so excited that the state of Connecticut in the last couple of years really invested in figuring out where our community is, and through that investment created an LGBTQ+ human services network. And part of the work of that work is to do a real survey across the state of where we are and where our community is, and how it is that we can be empowered not only to find services, but to help ourselves as well. So thank you for reminding us. And I have to say, our next guest and panelist serves with us on that network. Several of you do, but it's Diana Lombardi. Hi, Diana.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. Some of the concerns that we have with trans people in shelters is that even with training, it's still hard for them to go, and because they worry about the frontline workers, those staff at the door, how they're going to be treating them. And with proposed changes coming down from Washington, they're creating even more anxiety among trans people. We as a whole have never experienced homelessness until we transition, and then we don't know how to access the system. So we worry about where we're going to find a shelter, will they accept us? And those concerns, I think, are real, and we have to be aware that many of the trans people don't know how to access the system. And with homelessness, CTAC got involved with them by getting a phone call one night 6 years ago around 1 o'clock in the morning. They were thrown out of a shelter, a trans woman. They were placed in a men's shelter, and the other residents started throwing things at them and creating a problem. And who got thrown out was a trans person. And through Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness and the Connecticut Center for Fair Housing, we worked on, we found a place for the person. But from that, we started a training. And we did a lot of training over the last 4 years. But still, with the turnover in the shelters, we still are a little worried, the trans community, worried about finding a safe place. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you so much for that, and for reminding us about the need for a safe place. Next, we have Rosa Kleneski, train-the-trainer volunteer at ACT Connecticut. Hi, Rosa.
Hi, how are you?
Good, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Thank you. My name is Rosa Kleneski, and I conduct transgender trainings for ACT Connecticut throughout the state, throughout the course of the year. A lot of the people that we serve are not just seropositive individuals, but people who are just in the throes of homelessness. So my perspective in this is a little slightly different from what I've heard from other people, and that is I like to think about what is the push behind this, from the other side's perspective. And so it's important to be able to work across the aisle with with conservatives. And I think what we have to understand fundamentally is that conservatives believe in a doctrine called biological determinism, and that means that sex is immutable, meaning whatever you are born, that is the sex that you remain. So someone like me as a trans woman would not exist, right? Because I was born a man, therefore I am a man, and there's nothing you can do to change that. And in some other states that are not as progressive as Connecticut, and I hate to pick on any individual state, I'm going to pick on Tennessee for a second because they're one that comes to mind. You cannot change your birth certificate in Tennessee, okay? So if you were born in Tennessee and you were a male, and you transition to be female, there's nothing you can do. You cannot change your birth certificate to female. That's a state law, not in a federal umbrella. But the point is, I think conservatives are on the wrong side of history with this in terms of their identification of biological determinism as like this key doctrine, right? So I think intersex individuals can show us that sex and gender is on a continuum. And not something that is necessarily binary. And so I think that when we actually look at the science behind this, and this biological determinism comes from a misappropriation of Judeo-Christian religious identification. And it's placing religion ahead of science. The only thing I am nervous about, I brought several things. If I get discriminated against, I fight back. I fight back hard. And I brought several cases through the CHRO. Using it was actually 2011, not 2017, when we added gender identity and expression to the state statutes. And that act, which was called an Act Concerning Discrimination, codified gender identity or expression as a protected class in the state of Connecticut. So I've brought several actions through CHRO using that law. I settled all of them without going through the entire process because I got the appropriate changes that I was looking for. But the attorneys at CHRO were very clear and told me no one has actually successfully used this law we've never tested it. We've never tested it. So we have this law in the books that says gender identity and expression is a protected class. No one's used it yet. So it makes me a little bit worried when I hear the federal law is changing because, as we all know, federal law trumps state law. And I mentioned this to Sarah earlier. If there were a person who went into a shelter who was very religious and they didn't want to see a trans person there, and they brought a lawsuit against the shelter and said, I don't want this trans person here, it's against my religious beliefs, they'd probably win that case because the federal law trumps our state anti-discrimination statutes. So I want to see changes at the federal level. I don't think this change is in the right direction. I agree with everyone else on this panel that it's nonsense. That being said, I think it's important to understand the underpinnings of what the other side is coming from, and then it makes it a little easier to maybe come to a negotiation at some point in the future. With that, I'll share the time. Thank you.
Rosa, thank you so much for that really thoughtful presentation. And I think it is important to see the perspectives that we're coming from, but also the things that unify us. And, you know, if we focus on human dignity and if we focus on self-determination, and those are two critical elements of who we are as human beings, then it really does point to what you're describing, which is the importance of respecting individuals and where they may be on that spectrum that you described. So thank you, Rosa, so much. It really it gives us a lot to think about and a lot for our viewers to think about as well. Next, I'd like to move to Lane Janakos. Lane is also a member of the LGBTQ+ Services Network. Welcome, Lane.
Hello, thank you for having me. So a little bit about my role. I am the Director of Programming at Anchor Health Initiative, which for those who don't know is a LGBTQ healthcare organization. We currently have 2 clinics. One is in Hamden, one is in Stamford, but we do serve people throughout the state. As the Director of Programming, one of the programs that I oversee is our case management program, and I do provide direct case management services to our clients. These are open to all of our clients who come to us. They tend to be LGBTQ people, but overwhelmingly those referred to me for case management are trans people. And so I'm someone that directly sees the trans people dealing with unstable housing, unsafe housing, or being literally homeless at the time at which they're referred to me. I'd like to point out that there was a 2015 survey that went out called the United States Transgender Survey. It was done by the National Center for Transgender Equality. And to date, this is the largest survey that's ever been conducted of trans people anywhere in the world. So it is specific to the United States, but it has really great data. And the numbers that it pulled were really alarming. They showed that 1 in 5 transgender people will experience homelessness at some point during their lifetime. They showed that in the past year, those who had experienced homelessness, of those trans people, 70% reported some type of negative interaction at a shelter based on their gender identity or expression. And 52%, so over half of them, reported actually being verbally, physically, or sexually attacked or assaulted at shelters. So these were the ones who actually got through the doors, were already in the shelter. So when we determine where somebody should be housed in shelter based on their sex, their biological sex, or their federal sex, we set them up for a lot of dangerous situations. There are many reports of transgender women being forced to be housed with men and being assaulted, and vice versa. There are transgender men who are forced to be, housed with women that were attacked. And this does happen in our state. There is a Connecticut specific example that I have where the Sylvia Rivera Law Project, which is a nonprofit LGBTQ law center, actually had test callers, and they randomly picked shelters across the United States to call and say, I'm a trans person, I'm interested in your shelter services. Is that for me? And there was a shelter in Connecticut that said, no, we won't accommodate you. And when they asked for clarification, they said, no, we don't accommodate people like you. So this does happen in our home state. We are lucky that the law is on our side, but if we are not reporting these things and if we don't have the people there directly assisting, then we don't know about that. I see people across the spectrum who are currently homeless, trans people, and it's anywhere from what people would expect. They're kicked out of the house because their family is not okay with it, but sometimes it's even down to the landlord. I have one client who came out, transitioned, and was chased down the street by their landlord because they came out wearing a dress one day and he didn't like that. So even if the law were on her side and told her you're allowed to stay here, that was no longer a safe place for her to stay. And in the state of Connecticut, for somebody to access shelter services, they have to go through 211. And I will tell you that getting my clients to go through 211 is not an easy task at all. It's this fear of rejection, this fear of ignorance, and this fear of ineffectiveness with the system that keeps a lot of trans people from accessing these services. And I approach it in my role, specifically working in healthcare, as an intersectional problem and a problem of overall wellness. There are, of course, reasons somebody's health might be affected by homelessness, but even down to logistical things that people don't think about. If you have state insurance, which in Connecticut is Husky, if you're low income, it's Husky D, every so often you get a redetermination notice in the mail, and you need to fill that out and send it back. Otherwise, your healthcare will be suspended. If somebody doesn't have a physical address that they can receive mail at, they're not going to get that in time. So I have had many clients had their insurance suspended as a result of being homeless. So it's more than just, can they access a shelter? Can they get into a shelter? And where are they going to be housed? It's this multifaceted intersectional issue that bleeds into every single part of a trans person's life. And even if we do have those state protections, I really like what Rosa was saying earlier, where just the fear of being discriminated against stops a lot of trans people from accessing these services. And even though we have this call right now full of people who are on the right side of this, there are a lot of people who aren't. And coming together and talking about these things is the only way we can start to address these issues from that full perspective. So thank you for having this panel.
Thank you, Lane. And thank you for reminding us, I like to think of Connecticut as a microcosm in so many good ways of the rest of the country, but it truly is a microcosm of the rest of the country. And there, as we've said before in this conversation, there are those spaces where discrimination continues to happen. And it's only in having these conversations and sharing this information, sharing hope, and sharing that light for members of our community who are out there listening to know that they have somewhere and we are here. So thank you for that, Lane. So I'd like to move now to our responsive panel, but before I do so, I'm going to put you on the spot, Richard, because you said something really critically important in the chat that I'd really like for you to highlight. You really bring out the fact that so much of what can happen through these federal pronouncements or even local misunderstanding can pit people against each other in our communities. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think if you read the actual proposed rule change, one of the things that it allows for is not only for shelters to claim a religious exemption and then therefore discriminate against people who are transgender, with some messaging about how you have to then work with other shelters to find accommodations. But what essentially does is it also allows shelters to say that if you choose to comply with equal access, meaning that you create a welcoming environment for people who are trans or gender nonconforming, then you are then also required to accommodate anybody who is uncomfortable with having a person who's transgender or gender nonconforming in the shelter, and say that you have to accommodate their shelter needs. What it essentially does is it kind of reinforces that stigma and the bigotry that and says that if there's another shelter resident who says, I'm not comfortable having a transgender person in this shelter, you got to find me other shelter. And so, all it really does is it sort of highlights that reinforces and legitimizes bigotry and hatred against people who are trans and gender nonconforming. And so, again, we have protections in our state, but again, there's so much more we need to do to send that message. As Rosa and Lane and others you mentioned, like we need to do more to make people know that you can access shelter and be safe. And this rule just sends the opposite message. It just says that when you go to shelters, you will be discriminated against not only by the staff, but also by other residents. And that's why we really need to fight this. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you, Richard. And, again, Rosa, to your point earlier, this is why training is so important. And training in what your rights are and training through misperceptions, because otherwise all that happens is that we are pitting our residents against each other. And it's an outcome where nobody wins. And it's an outcome where our most vulnerable people are actually hurt. So thank you so much, Richard. And thank you all to the panel for your presentation. I'm going to move now to our responsive panel. These are leaders and members of the community who really have who've been listening intently and really have their finger on the pulse of so much of what's happening. I'm going to introduce you one at a time, although some of you need very little introduction. I'm going to start with Jeff Curry. State Representative Jeff Curry, welcome.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I would say when Sarah originally sent the email a few months ago about this, I'd say I wanted to be surprised, but it just comes after a slew of other attempts that we have continued to see where to peel back the personhoods and rights and dignity of trans and gender nonconforming folks in our workplace, in our education systems, military, beyond. This administration just continues to sink to new lows when we thought that they couldn't go any lower. But in this, saga of cowardly acts and bullying, This administration definitely has managed to lag several decades behind common sense and the national conversations around LGBTQ plus rights with, self-effaced blindfolds and earplugs disrupting all senses as they continue to draft policy that puts people's lives at risk. And I think that's what needs to be highlighted. This puts people's lives at risk. I'll opine a little bit more as we move on towards the closing, but I just want to thank everyone for allowing all of us to come together today to have this conversation and hopefully get this call to action out for folks across the state.
Thank you, Jeff. This is a human rights, and it's a matter of life and death. So thank you for reminding us of that. Hi, Rahib, welcome. State Representative Ali Brennan.
Hey, everyone. I'm State Representative Raheb Ali Brennan. I represent the 2nd District, which includes my hometown of Bethel, part of Danbury, part of Reading, and part of Newtown. I'm famously the number 2 gay in the State House to my friend Jeff Curry. I just want to say, we know that there's no data to support that transgender individuals pose a danger, in our homeless system. This rule is nothing more than cruelty. And it sends a dangerous message to shelters that they are allowed to sex stereotype. And I don't know how during a global pandemic, when the best tool for avoiding illness is to stay home, it is unthinkable that the federal government would make it more difficult for people to find safe and secure shelter. And I probably will get in trouble for saying this, but President Trump hates trans people, plain and simple. 1 in 5 transgender individuals will be homeless at some point in their lives. We are certainly lucky here in Connecticut, and we need to let that be known. But I think about the transgender individuals in the Midwest and in the South who already face the possibility of being forced to sleep on the streets because of who they are and will now avoid shelters and potentially sleep in unsafe conditions. So, we have to remember we are in a pandemic where economic situations will turn more to shelters. We still have more work to do on LGBTQ homeless youth, especially here in Connecticut. I know last time I checked, it's higher than the national average. And, I look forward to continuing that work as a coalition and with the LGBTQ gosh, help me out here, Jeff.
Human
Services Network, yeah. We've got too many things on this group, but it's a good thing because we work together. So I want to thank you so much for highlighting this issue. And I think it's important that we remind people because, some people in Connecticut won't realize if they're allowed to still go to a shelter in our own state. So it's important work we're doing here. And thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Rahib, and thank you, Representative Curry and Ali Brennan. The two of you are real lights in our leadership infrastructure at the legislature, and you're a light not only to everyone here, but any kid who may be watching right now who sees themselves in you and your leadership, and in all of us here on these panels. So thank you so much to both of you. And speaking of leadership and leadership matters, hi, John Mertz.
Hey, everybody.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you all. Rosa, much love. So when Sarah started talking, it reminded me of a slogan that you all know, which is silence equals death. So I think it's so important that we're having this conversation. And of course, silence equals death came from the ACT UP movement 35 years ago, which is the roots of our organization. And as Senator Anwar said, we're having a sense of history. Here we go again. And the good thing is that we have been here before, and we know how to mobilize, and we know how to go to the streets, and we know how to chain ourselves to fences in front of the White House or lay ourselves down on the streets. And I know Jeff is going to give us a charge at some point, but I just want to remind folks that the history of the AIDS movement and even in the homelessness movement has been born of activism. And I see the sparks of that in the conversations that we're having. And I just want to flame those. I guess I would say in the name of Sean Lang, my deputy director who's on vacation and would have pushed me off to the corner so that she could be here with you all. But we as an organization are committed. We retain the acronym ACT, because we believe that action is important. And then the final thing I'll say is, as one of the co-chairs of the Balance of State Continuum of Care, we will hold our providers to a higher standard, even if our federal government doesn't. So that is my pledge to you all on behalf of the Balance of State Continuum of Care.
Thank you, John, and thank you for saying that. You know, we have to keep our the feet to the fire, the people who lead in the state, and that is whether they control the resources, whether they control the messaging, and whether they control in some ways life and death situations, as was described earlier. So thank you, John. Kylie, I'm so happy to see you. So full disclosure, I'm on the board for the partnership, and I'm so proud of the work that you do and your leadership. So welcome, Kylie.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Well, it's an honor to be with this group today. And it's also a challenge to come late in the process when everybody said so many wonderful things, and many of the things that I was going to say either. So Kathleen, I'm sorry for you are coming after me. But again, great to be among this crowd. And if you're out there watching this on CTN and you're wondering, what's the point of having all these people get together? They all agree on this. Everyone agrees this is a bad rule. All these state experts and great people with lived experience are here saying this is bad and Connecticut's not going to do this. And our laws, you know, allow us to help continue to protect people. What's the point of this? There's two things that I would say to that and emphasize. One, and Jeff Curry accurately described this, this is a life safety issue. As a couple of people have noted with the statistics, there's no evidence showing that there's a safety risk in shelters for having folks in with different orientations or gender identities. There is statistics showing that particularly transgender folks and LGBTQ folks are at much higher risk of sex trafficking and even death if they're not able to be safe. And with 1 in 5 transgender folks experiencing homelessness, what the Trump administration is doing here, and make no mistake about this, is putting human lives at risk in an effort to gain votes. And so if that makes you uncomfortable, I would say please vote in November or earlier if that's if you have the ability to do that. And the second thing I would say is this is a lot about messaging and important messaging. And I, like Richard, had the opportunity to work at the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, along with the National Alliance to End Homelessness. And I'm proud to say that Connecticut is looked at as a real leader when it comes to homelessness response in the fight to end homelessness. We really have one of the best coordinated access network systems in the country. Other states look to our collaborative efforts to figure out how to align themselves to achieve what Connecticut's achieved. And what Connecticut has achieved in the last 15 years is a major decrease in the number of people experiencing homelessness, as well as shorter shelter stays and quicker moves to permanent housing over time, better placements in permanent supportive housing, and development of that housing. And so history really has its eyes on Connecticut when it comes to our response to these particular issues. And so I think its messaging is so important on two fronts. One, at the national level, folks are going to look at what we do and how we respond to this. And folks who are trying to access our shelter system are going to look for messaging. And the message right now that they're getting from the Trump administration is that this is not a safe place for you to go. And so it's up to all of us in leadership roles at the state, all of the providers around the state, to be continually messaging that this is a safe place for you to come and find shelter. So with that, I'll turn it back to Steve.
Thank you, Kylie. I also know that we have representatives from our federal delegation here, and Connecticut leads not only in the state, but also Connecticut leads nationally in the narratives and in the energies to really help people across the country, and also to express the human dignity of our people here in Connecticut. So thank you for reminding us of that. Finally, and certainly last but certainly not least, Kathleen Meaden, so much of what you're doing on the ground is so critical and resonates with a lot of what we're talking about. Hi, Kathleen.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you so much. And thank you, all of you, for your time, your dedication, and all the work that you do to further gay, lesbians, and transgendered people's rights. My name is Kathleen Whedon. I am the Director of Housing at Columbus House in New Haven. And I guess, like Kylie said, it's hard to say something after everybody said so much. But what I was thinking about when folks were talking is, I want to bring you back to 1995. And in 1995, I was working in a homeless shelter, not the one that I work at now, a different one. And a transgendered individual came into the office, and it was a transgendered male to female, and she was looking for a bed and a female. And the intake worker at the time asked her to drop her pants. That happened because we didn't have laws to protect. And as we roll back these laws, we lose that opportunity to protect. And, I hate to compare this administration to Nazi Germany, but I can't help but look at the process by which people's rights were slowly eroded backwards, one by one by one by one. We took, in that period, they took Jews and they made them wear stars, and then they made them have passports, and then they put them in ghettos, and then they put them in concentration camps. It wasn't a single leap. It was an erosion of the rights. And I believe that we're facing a turning point in our society, in our community, in our world. And it is imperative that we fight against this in every way that we possibly can, because this is where that starts. And I don't want to live in a world where that's where we begin to make laws that allow discrimination. We're supposed to be making laws that prevent it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathleen. And thank you for reminding us to continue to be vigilant. I think you're right. There is a time-honored tradition of a process into tyranny, a descent into tyranny. And we have the experience of history that teaches us, but which means that we have to double down on our resolve. So thank you for reminding us of that, but also reminding us of our strength together amongst ourselves and with our allies. Jeff, I'm going to come back to you because there's so much to do. And we have to think about what the next steps are and what the call to action really is. So welcome, Jeff Curry. Welcome back.
And before I do that, I just want to make sure that we note Aaron was nice enough to go ahead and throw up in our chat that the governor has just announced that the eviction moratorium has now been extended to October 1st. So that is good news for many people who were concerned on that front. So thank you, Aaron, for that. And also thank you, Aaron, for really highlighting originally the beacon of hope that Connecticut offers for its residents, and the fact that we do have so many protections in place, and that many places don't have, that I think some often take for granted, and definitely don't see that there's that need for call to action in other parts of the country. And so hopefully this call to action will get everybody motivated to not only help out our neighbors here in New England, but all around the country. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Put this up while we're talking. Can everyone see that? Good. All right. So I just want to thank everyone for, did that go away? Sorry about that. I knew this was going to happen. There we go. All right. So I just want to thank everyone for participating in today's panel. I want to thank Stephen Hernandez from the Commission on Women, Children, Seniors, Equity, and Opportunity, as well as Warner for putting this together. Big thanks to Sarah Fox from the Connecticut Coalition on Homelessness, Dylan, True Colors, Aaron, Senator Anwar, State Representative Ali Brennan, Commissioner Scar Bruno, Richard, Jen, Diana, Rosalane, John, Kylie, Kathleen for being panelists and for leading this charge to end homelessness in our state and bring awareness around this particular issue. I also do want to thank our congressional delegation for their work and for standing up against this and so many other blatant attacks on the LGBTQ plus community. Changing the equal access rule will undoubtedly increase housing instability among members of our community, especially our transgendered tribe members, who already face a higher risk of homelessness due to a variety of issues. It is unconscionable proposal, which becomes even more cruel considering the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, which has essentially destabilized many Americans' already fragile lives. We've seen historic levels of unemployment. People cannot afford their rent or mortgage. Luckily, we just heard this moratorium was extended. And these folks are teetering on the edge of eviction and foreclosure. This proposed change allows for publicly funded discrimination. Say that again, publicly funded discrimination, and will have deleterious, irreversible consequences. So I hope that you will join us in speaking out against this rule change. So you can submit your public comments. You see the site on the screen here, housingSavesLives.org. If you've never done something like this, don't worry, don't be bashful, don't be shy, don't think that you have to create some sort of dissertation to provide to them. If you actually go to this site, it has a number of key points that you can include yourself to make sure you highlight when you do want to go ahead and submit something. But just remember, your voice matters, and collectively, we can protect equal access to shelters. Those who are in the direst of circumstances should be able to count on publicly funded services without fear of violence or rejection. We have the obligation to call out bigotry and discrimination when we see it, and as public leaders and those who simply care to be decent human beings, we have a duty to eradicate the systems and institutions that perpetuate it. So thank you again all for joining us in this fight, and thank you all for participating again on this panel.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you for your call to action, and thank you for helping us lead in Connecticut and be an example for the rest of the country and the work that is happening here. As so many of you have reminded us, however, the work is not done, and with every step forward, there are steps back that are happening within our communities quietly, and I appreciate all of your efforts to bring that to light and to ensure that every single member of our community feels safe and feels and experiences the dignity of shelter. So I want to take again the opportunity to thank each of you. I'm going to go around and give you each of you one final word. I hate to put you on the spot, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I'm going to do it in the order in which I see you, so I don't lose track of you. So I'm going to start with Sarah Fox. You could just unmute. There you go.
I'm so happy and pleased to have participated in this conversation and for all of your amazing leadership every day across the state. Always concerned about people who are falling through the cracks in our system, and likewise about my LGBTQIA brothers and sisters. So all the work that we can do together to forward this and to make sure that everyone feels safe and that we're moving towards getting everyone housed as well is very deeply important to me. So thanks everyone so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Diana.
Thank you for having me here today. I think one of the important things that we take away from this is that we are in a blue bubble. You know, Connecticut is unique. Other states are not so advanced, progressive as Connecticut is for LGBT rights. And we're always moving forward. And I think that's such a positive thing that it gives us hope that the rest of the nation will follow us. Thank you for having this panel discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. And thank you for your service to the LGBTQ plus network and for reminding us in the chat that toward the fall, there is going to be a survey conducted in partnership with Yale of the LGBTQ plus community and the human services needs that are being experienced by our people across the state. Where are you? How can we help? How can you help us? How can we be closer together? So thank you so much for reminding us of that. John Mertz.
Okay, so I would say speak up, send those messages, act up when necessary, and let's call it out as Kathleen did. It's not just cruel, it's evil. Much love to y'all.
Thank you, John. Kylie.
Thanks again for inviting me to be a part of this panel. Thanks to CCH, the commission, and all of you for all the wonderful work that you're doing. I just want to, again, echo so much of what was said, what Diana said, and what echo Kathleen's comments earlier. This is a really, I don't know the words to describe this time. I think Jeff Curry accurately described sort of the descent we've seen in human rights over the past 4 years. Connecticut has always been a leader in this. And if it's not for states like us, then I fear that the slide that we've seen will continue. So it's up to all of us to continue to push forward and do the great work that we've been doing, but really continue to message and be loud and clear about where we stand on this. So I'd invite all of you to participate in the comments that Representative Curry put up earlier, and get out there and vote.
Thank you, Kylie. Jennifer.
Hello, I thank you all again for the opportunity to be a part of this panel. It was truly an honor to work, to have a conversation with you all and to hear just how beautiful you all are in this work and in your hard efforts. I think if I had to say anything is that this rule provides the guidance and support and structure and resources that shelters need. And so it is not just a matter of being a matter of basic dignity and access to basic healthcare services and human services, although certainly that is enough. On top of that, it is ensuring that our providers have the guidance and support and the direction that we need to provide that care in a standardized, effective, and equitable way. I echo Kylie in her efforts to say, get out the vote, go vote. And that the deliverable and the action item that Representative Curry listed, it can be big and small. If you oppose this equal access rule rollback, that's what you have to say. You could say, I oppose this, and that is your testimony. A testimony does not have to be an ongoing ramble of words, of passionate language, of wordsmithing, although certainly we all have it in us to be poetic, and especially when it comes to our own basic human rights, we all have it in us. But it can certainly just be, no, I oppose this. So it can be big and small, and I encourage everybody to join these efforts. So thank you all.
Thank you. Hashtag don't do this. It can be that simple. Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, Lane.
Hi. I am so happy this conversation is happening, and I hope that this isn't the end of it. Regardless of what happens with this ruling, this has been an issue. This is going to continue to be an issue. Trans people, we're here, we matter, we won't be erased. The LGBT community really needs to step up right now and do more for the trans members of the larger community. You know, like I said, this is going to keep happening. There are still going to be trans people with needs that aren't being met. And if you want to know what you can do, you need to go to the community. You need to have trans people on your organizations. You need to have community advisory boards. You need to talk to the trans people having these experiences and doing this work. And only then will you understand what needs to happen and what actionable steps and items we can do to move forward. So I hope that this is not the end of this conversation, although I'm really happy it's happening today. Thank you all.
Thank you, Lane. Hi, Rosa.
Hi, Stephen. I guess I would just say, you know, as a trans woman, I don't really want special rights or special considerations. I just want equal protection under the law, like everyone else is afforded. And I feel like if I, heaven forbid, had to go to a shelter, then I would want the same protections any cisgender female were afforded if they were to go to that shelter. And I couldn't imagine being treated any other way. And in fact, I'll just end with this, which is to say, you know, I'm 40 years old and I'm situated in a home, but if I thought that being transgender, if I changed my gender identity, it was going to put me out on the street and I was going to lose my housing, I would still change my gender identity. That's how, you know, strongly I feel about being the correct gender, that even if I lost my shelter, I would still do it. So, like, we really need to treat trans people with dignity and respect in every setting. especially in that when it comes to homelessness. So I want to thank Sarah and John for setting me up on the panel, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rosa. Our co-host, Richard. Hi, Richard.
Even, I mean, so much has already been said. I want to just, again, express my gratitude to all of you and to all of those that are watching here today to join us. I guess I'll just say, like, again, like, let's not be complacent. We're in a friendly state for people who are LGBTQIA, but like, we got to do more than that. And, you know, first thing first, we got to fight against the administration's cruel reversal of this policy, but we got to go beyond that. It's not just about preventing bad rules from happening. We got to go beyond to make sure that our shelters are welcoming to all, and create and go beyond, you know, above and beyond to make sure that people who are transgender and gender nonconforming, like, you know, that there's a safe place for you to go. You don't need to be on the street. So thank you all for joining us in this fight, and let's keep moving forward.
Thank you so much. Commissioner.
First of all, thank you. Thank you very much, Stephen, for organizing this forum. Is always an education to me. Thank you for telling your stories. I think that the continuation and continue promoting training and also just tell your story. Simple stories will change lives and will change the view of many that sometimes it's just that they don't know all the different issues that people go through. So I always like to do something proactive in anything that I do, right? No, I don't like just to talk. So I was looking in Google a word that will help me and how can I support the LGBTQ. So I found in one of the websites the word ally. And what it means to be an ally, someone who has your back and is on your side. Somebody that can listen, just listen to somebody's story. And for me, just as simple as wearing a t-shirt, the LGBTQ, and I run, and it's my favorite shirt. And in my community, I go outside and run, and people are looking at me, but I really don't care. So if you can do one thing, be an ally. So I am your ally today. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. A real expression of leadership, and also to our viewers out there who are wondering how they can help. It sounds like a call of action to me to allies that are out in the state of Connecticut and beyond. So thank you for that, Commissioner. Kathleen.
I think that not only should we be talking about equal access and shelter, but looking at a bigger picture. We oftentimes think of air, food, water as something that's a fundamental right, and we need to start thinking about housing as a fundamental right. It is the only thing that so far in our society seems like we expect people to earn it, rather than have it guaranteed to them. And housing is a right, and it should be guaranteed. And I hope that that's the place that we get to.
Thank you, Kathleen. That is a laudable goal. That is exactly right. A basic human right. Thank you for reminding us of that. Erin Kempel.
So I would like to say, be like Rosa. During Rosa's initial talk, she said, I fight discrimination whenever I see it. I've filed many cases at CHRO. We all need to be more like Rosa. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. Representative Ali Brennan.
Yeah, I just think we need to be more vigilant, especially during the time of the coronavirus. You know, we're all kind of secluded at home, focused on ourselves, our health, our families. There's still stuff going on. And, we've been dealing with a lot of this negative stuff for 4 years now. And I think we get complacent and we just see it and we keep moving on. It's important that we stop and speak about it and talk through it. And that we also signal to people in the community and in Connecticut that, people are scared and they might think they hear something like that and they're like, well, I can't go to a shelter, or this rule affects me in my state. What's Connecticut doing? I think it's important that we remind them, you're safe here, you're good here, because we already got your back. So, and I think it means a lot because some people might miss out on going, getting resources because they don't know the rules. And so I think we also need to do a better job as just, being members of the LGBTQ community and supporting each other. Because, obviously, I think for years we've been highlighting, gay marriage, and obviously there's bigger issues than that. And we're learning about them and we're diving deep into them together. So I'm proud to be beside all of you, and thank you guys.
Thank you. And finally, but certainly not least, Jeff Curry.
Thanks, Stephen. And again, thank you everyone for participating today, and for everybody at home who's watching this important event. A lot of talk has been had around the LGBTQ Health and Human Services Network that we started here in Connecticut. We were the first state to actually have something like this put into statute. So it's here to stay for as long as those statutes are around, and we will fight to keep that as strong as possible. And I'm hoping that through conversations like this, Richard and Sarah and Coalition might want to partner a little closer with the network to help with improving access to shelter and housing. I know Sarah has already reached out and hoping that this can happen. So hoping that these kind of dialogues will continue and really get people to further understand exactly what it is that we're talking about today and all the other issues impacting our community. So make sure that you stand up, act out, speak out, use housingsavelives.org to get the message out to these folks that this is an absolutely abhorrent and ridiculous proposal. And just remember that in the years to come, when the Trump administration has long been disbanded, we will remember this proposal and all other attacks on the LGBTQ+ community as no more than acts of cowardice seeking to undermine and unwrite history. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for that. I don't think I can end it in any better way, but to say thank all of you for being here with us today, for your continued advocacy. Representative Ali Brennan, I think you're right. We have to keep digging deeper, and we have to keep chipping away at what has taken a long time to build, the discrimination and the barriers that have been built between us. So with that, I thank all of you, and let's keep pushing. Tomorrow, I just want to highlight that tomorrow we will be continuing part of this conversation in the spirit of chipping away, where at 1 o'clock we'll be focusing on women erased, and we'll be focusing on women erased when they lead and when they suffer. And that'll include a conversation about trans women and women of color. So thank you all so much for being here today. Let's keep talking, let's keep sharing, let's keep doing, most importantly. And we'll see you again. Take care.